you're actually a little bit worried by some of the trends in education today, aren't you?
Yeah, look, one of the things that worries me is this Taylorism of education. This is sort of where we take a factory model of education and look at pulling together materials and having vast numbers of students working through those materials, and particularly, possibly by someone who's maybe not really a teacher who's not really engaged with those materials themselves.
Right, so a teacher who's not engaged with the materials. Um, and just for those of us who might not be familiar, with the idea, what do you mean by Taylorism?
Uh, this It's kind of a factory model, really, a production line approach, whereby you you have a set of components that you assemble using a very efficient process, and then you sort of crank a handle, an outcome, very standard sort of outputs, and that's the analogy we're using here of an education system, whereby materials are quickly put together. Um, uh, Particularly perhaps in an online environment, there's a temptation for this. And then the handle you crank is putting students through all this course, and you get students that all come out who perhaps have memorised that material very well, but don't have some of the things that we would classically associate with education.
Right. Sorry, it just takes me a second to type the notes up. And now, one aspect of the Taylorism is the factory model that you just said, and I think the other assumption underlying it is related to specialization, isn't it? The idea that someone could take an assembled curriculum that came out of a factory and just teach students based on that curriculum.
Yeah, this is where we start to get into this lecturer scholar, which is perhaps more how people think, uh, particularly at universities, education works. And they think of the lecturer scholar as the lecturer who's someone who has a deep knowledge and history with the topic that they're teaching, and has thought very carefully about it, and is aware of all the issues, and has a particular perspective to offer his students. Now, that's not to say every lecturer is going to have the same perspective, but they will have a perspective that they've built up on a large amount of thought and of reading or interacting with people in that field. Compare that with the Taylorism model, whereby you say, let's put together a course and put someone, gives, make someone present that course who perhaps isn't completely engaged with the material, perhaps didn't put the course together, um, and even if they are familiar with the material, the course that's put together may not be one they particularly believe in.
Right. Yep. I think that's starting to make sense about like the difference in that what you call the Taylorist approach versus the lecturer as scholar approach. I think, if I understand correctly, fundamental to your idea of lecturer as scholar is the idea of that process of scholarly activity, whereby, as you said, a lecturer goes through, researches something, discovers something, puts the curriculum together. There's something special about that process which is not commensurate with the importance of what gets produced, the learning curriculum.
Yeah, in a sense, this lecturer scholar is saying that the lecturer effectively goes through the same process that we want the students to go through, which is an individual learning path, whereby the student engages with different ideas, makes sense of them, and brings into the context their own ideologies, their own experience, their own beliefs, and comes up with their own perspective on the learning material. And and effectively, we're saying that the teacher should do that first, before they start asking students to do it. So we should be practicing what we preach in that regard. I mean, the alternative is to ask students just to familiarise themselves with a set of materials. This is like asking someone to maybe learn dates. So you might ask them, for example, to remember, who was Franz Ferdinand, and when was what was an important date in relation to him. Um, that's a Taylorism model. The alternative is to say, well, what do you think were the significant events that led up to the First World War? And there's going to be lots of different perspectives on that based on people's beliefs and experience as to what were the main events that led up to it. And that's a much deeper education. So, in the lecturer as scholar model, we're looking at that deeper education. We're looking at people that are thinking, that are bringing in different perspectives, that are formulating their own views on these things rather than parroting just facts, figures, or someone else's views.
Cool, thanks. Um, so then I think it's fair to say that you see value in that process, and it's quite clear what the value is in the process of a lecturer as a scholar engaging in a deeper understanding, having the time and the energy and the motivation to put together some teaching resources for their students that they particularly believe in, they understand deeply, they're passionate about. Why then do you think Taylorism is coming about? What's driving that?
Yeah, this is, I guess we've always had a mass education system, but there's an increasing trend in society to move more towards efficiency and things that are measurable and looking at quicker and faster ways of doing things.
And
And that
cheaper ways, I suppose.
and cheaper too, of course. And that's one of the things that is now starting to, well, it has always been in education, but is increasingly becoming a mindset within institutions as to how they should be offering education to more and more students. And that's leading to this idea that all you need is a set of materials and an instructor. Whereas what I'm suggesting here is that the actual materials that are produced by an instructor are just an artifact. What is much more important is that instructor's knowledge and understanding. And a good instructor can get by with very few materials if necessary. The materials are not what's important here. I guess the important thing in this sense is, in fact, the understanding, the knowledge.
Right. Again, I think I follow that. And so we've covered why there's some pressure for this Taylorist type approach. Now, isn't it the case though that your idealistic notion of the scholarly lecturer is a bit too inefficient? I mean, we have lecturers who might teach 2 or 3 units or 4 units or 6 units. Surely they can't all really be scholars in every single one of them. There are institutional pressures to teach various units and things, aren't there?
Yeah, yeah. Look, of course, someone who's an expert in one area may have to teach other areas in which they're not so expert. But the same processes should apply. Of course, initially when they start teaching that area, they'll be like any student that's new to an area. But that's not to say they shouldn't be able to and shouldn't be developing their understanding in the same way that students do, so that with each year they become more and more expert in that. And in fact, that can lead to a much more rounded scholar that now understands not only one area but multiple areas. So that sort of teaching into other areas is probably something that should be encouraged, and we shouldn't just adopt this idea that, well, just because you're not very efficient in teaching this area, you're not going to get an opportunity to teach in that area. That's another aspect of Taylorism, is specialisation, and I think that is also a killer in education. We don't want siloed specialists that understand only very narrow things.
I think I fell behind writing the notes on that one, but I think I understood the point, which is that one is, if you do have to teach a unit that's unfamiliar to you, I think you did mention this, if you do have to teach a unit that's unfamiliar to you, if you do have those research and scholarly skills, you can do a better job of doing that, and hence, and in effect, to develop and practice those skills, you should be encouraged to teach things that you're not necessarily an expert in, as long as you get to exercise that scholarly activity around it.
Yeah, effectively what you're saying is that scholars will become more and more rounded, teachers will become more and more rounded as they go through their careers, which is what you would expect. They become more and more familiar with other disciplines or other topics, and then that should, in practice, enhance the quality of even their core expertise. And in my experience, that has been the case.
I think another experience that many lecturers will relate to that may help establish the sort of disposition is it's actually quite uncomfortable as a lecturer being given a whole bunch of course curriculum and being told, right, you can teach this course starting Monday. You don't need a lot of preparation time because the curriculum's all there.
Yeah, this is the classic thing where lecturers say it takes 10 hours to prepare a 1 hour lecture. The 10 hours is not finding a suitable set of materials. The 10 hours is getting your head around the topics and concepts and extracting from that some message to give to your students. And so the idea that you can walk into a class and deliver someone else's materials essentially would be no better than that the students just read the book.
And in a strange kind of way, in a classroom, when you have all the students sitting there, even if you have someone else's PowerPoints, you still have to talk to them and present your own spin on them. I think perhaps this might be exacerbated in the online environment, where if someone gives you a whole bunch of curriculum, a whole bunch of readings that students are expected to read, and you're just managing the delivery, it's quite challenging
Yeah.
to get into all those materials, be very comfortable with them,
Yeah.
and feel confident delivering that material.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this comes back to this idea that individual people will have an individual take on any topic based on their experience and beliefs, and there's a message there, and that's what has to come through in the interaction with students. It's not just about the material. If you're just coming in with someone else's materials, then the message is going to be missing.
All right. Um, I suppose to wrap up, and I'm sorry the notes have fallen behind a little bit on this, but perhaps to wrap up, if you could just summarize what you see in terms of where to from here. What are some options for universities or for society from here on, assuming that this tendency to specialization and Taylorism is occurring? I know people might not agree with you about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but what are some options that you see on the horizon?
Well, clearly there's going to be an option for people to collaborate on producing resources in terms of lecture notes and things like that, and that's okay. Maybe you work. Maybe you don't develop a whole course on your own, but you work with a group of people that are doing that, or maybe you're contributing to multiple courses at once. So you're ineffectively multitasking, but you're working with a group of people in a collaborative exercise towards that. So you are in fact developing your knowledge as you develop the materials, even though you're not developing all the materials. Yeah.
Right.
So you are sharing the task effectively, and building your knowledge at the same time. That is one path. The other path is just to have vast databases of the topics which you effectively cut and paste to put together a course with perhaps very little understanding and very little coherence behind it.
Mm.
Yeah.
So are you saying then that, or sorry, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but let me ask the question: is there then a tension between the teaching as a scholarly activity and the sort of credentialing model of education, where the difference is, do students come to university to learn things deeply, or do they come to get a piece of paper that certifies them as being fit to do certain
Yeah.
jobs?
Yeah, this is a decision, I guess, that society has to make about what it wants from its education system. Because if you want to use the cut and paste model, then effectively it is just a credentialing exercise. It is saying be able to reproduce in an exam what you have read through this course or been told during this course. Now that's opposite or opposed to the idea that people will develop their own individual understandings based on a deep engagement with the material, which may in fact be controversial or at odds with the existing mindset or perhaps the mindset of that individual teacher. So, in that sense, they're two different things. One is an individual understanding of a topic, and the other is just regurgitating something they've been asked to learn.
Well, I think after talking to you about this, I do understand your ideas more clearly on this issue. So thank you very much, Matt Mitchell.
Thank you, Samar.